It's all part of the plan.
Zero.
But when I say the point...
5, you are coming with me.
On the 5th of November that shall never, ever be forgot.
Welcome to Part 2.
If you haven't gotten around to Part 1 yet, per the YouTube data, practically no one has.
Hey, nobody asked for your numbers, and they're off.
If you say so. So we're looking into V for Vendetta. How and why it's so arresting, and yet, in hindsight, fairly forgettable.
To get to the bottom of this one, we're going to have to plumb the depths of the elusive London Underground.
The London Underground is not a political movement.
Huh? You mean...
V for Vendetta is based on a graphic novel that was created in the early 80s.
Any discussion of this document or its contents will be regarded at the very least as an act of sedition, if not a willful act of treason.
We brought this up not only to show off our extensive research skills, but because the movie shook out with a number of story problems, and this is where we believe most of them originate.
The graphic novel is immense, and it would require many hours of movie to kind of explain it all.
So we tried to condense it and make the graphic novel more filmic.
See? They knew what to do. Lose all the dull, pointless talk and get to the action.
And yet a more in-depth examination reflects that it retains its original anti-establishment message, but expressed more vaguely while giving the masses their CGI bread and circuses.
Yeah, and it told us millennials that if things don't go our way, we should take to the streets wearing masks. Then we'll get what we want.
All these impressions from the same movie. Are we starting to see the problem here?
See, here's the thing about adapting a multi-volume written work into a 2-hour and 12-minute movie.
It's no picnic.
Broadly speaking, to pull this off, you have to, 1, cut a bunch of stuff out. There's just not room for all of it, so you gotta decide what's most essential.
2, do the appropriate patchwork to reconstruct an integrated, coherent, logical plot with what's left. Which means dealing with absentee characters, missing story segments, issues and ideas that already can't be covered with the same depth and insight in cinema as they can in literature, and are now crowded together into a limited running time. And compressed character arcs that have to not only remain intact, but resonate with characters that may have been severely diminished, or even combined with others.
And 3, if you've managed to pull off 1 and 2, which we think V for Vendetta really had no problems doing, you can't get so lost in this crucible to technically scale the story down to something manageable and unified that you forget to deliver a complete, emotionally satisfying viewing experience by capturing and conveying some proportion of the original mood of the source material and your own that you impart through your translation of it. Whew. So, yeah.
It's no picnic.
That last one is where V for Vendetta went tragically awry. While plenty of it wasn't carried over, the film is so overstuffed with fragmented plot elements from the comic that some of the most effectual moments that we fire up Netflix for in the first place, once we've taken the proper precautions, got pushed to the margins, and in some cases spread so thin that they're barely noticed as being in there at all. Also, in economizing these threads, way too many of the story's vital ingredients are laid out in expository dialogue rather than presented in action. Show, don't tell, is maybe the most fundamental rule of screenwriting, because, believe it or not, people who sit down to watch a movie aren't there to be informed of things, but to experience and feel their way through unfamiliar and hopefully interesting territory.
Now, this rule can be broken to great effect, if done sparingly, and for a clever storytelling purpose, like laying out artful dialogue, setting up some deceptive twist, or something along those lines. But in this case, the rule is not breached sparingly, but many times over, and seemingly for nothing other than a downsizing measure. The most glaring instance of this is the underdevelopment of the characters.
V for Vendetta features an amazing cast that's intriguing and diverse.
Not diverse enough.
What?
It's the only tragically unwoke part of this movie. They're all white.
Well, it is set in a society that's been ethnically cleansed by the state and still manages to include black gay guys, lesbians, burn victims, vaudevillians, gay half-Jewish guys who read the Quran, sick children, and weirdos.
But still.
Good point.
Anyway, they have a wide range of motivations and desires that make it clear who everybody is. There are some fantastic character-defining moments where we manage to connect.
I'm so sorry.
Momentarily, anyway. And they're peppered throughout the society so that their coverage gives us a decent representative cross-section of futuristic London.
So, why are you telling us?
Why are we having this conversation?
But
The dreaded yet foreseeable battle.
virtually all of them, definitely the most important ones, suffer from a lack of essential backstory. We never adequately get to know any of them. Who they were before Norse fire took over, everything they've lost because of it, and the suffering they've incurred along the way.
At best, we get choppy flashbacks set to explanatory voiceover.
So more telling than showing. This is a logical and efficient means of delivering context,
But if overused, as it is here, the audience feels like they're drinking from a fire hose, and emotional engagement can become irretrievable.
I never saw them again. It was like those black bags erased them from the face of the earth.
Of course, you don't want to bog your film down with non-pertinent background details. This isn't a novel.
But a certain amount of backstory is required to complete the picture of what we experience within the plot, and to elicit our full emotional investment in the story's events, moving us and leaving an indelible impression.
Now, some stories call for next to no backstory,
Well, that's just like, your opinion, man.
and others need to devote considerable attention to it. V for Vendetta's mythology necessitates quite a bit, much more than what we get.
You're getting back at them for what they did to you.
What was done to me was monstrous.
And they created a monster.
So we never become involved enough to care as much as the drama demands.
Starting with V, it's his merciless quest for personal revenge and the overthrow of Norse fire that comprises the main plot, and an integral component of it is missing: his suffering at the hands of his enemies.
Do you find me sadistic?
You will do the hardest time there is.
We needed to see at least some of what happened to him at Lark Hill. We get brief snippets of the awful conditions there, but we never actually see him in them. So there's no actual depiction of his suffering. So we never suffer with him, to the point that we're even clear on exactly what he's escaping from here, how bad it was, or in what way.
So this nearly great moment doesn't have the punch that it should, and then has a domino effect, pun intended, on V's entire rampage throughout the film, which, while fun and satisfying to a point,
Please, have mercy. Oh, not tonight, Bishop.
doesn't carry the emotional heft to fully justify it.
I have something for you, Chancellor.
It's not without sadness that we say goodbye to him at the end, but I think part of that comes from the fact that we never really connected with him like we should have.
Evie goes from a frightened girl trying to make her way within the system without rocking the boat to an assertive, independent, formidable revolutionary, heir to V's crusade for freedom.
Whatever he meant by that, and don't worry, we will revisit this. But beyond the overarching persecution, Evie's set apart by her family history.
But I don't think you understand why unless you know a few things about me.
Her brother was killed by the government-created virus, spurring her parents into political activism, which got them black-bagged.
I never saw them again.
A deep-rooted grievance against the regime that informs her whole character. And how do we find out about it?
Yep. brief narrated flashbacks
That was when everything changed.
that zip by at a pace that's just about right for us to put everything together intellectually, but no time to become emotionally involved.
I can't feel anything.
She's basically reading us the wiki page of her life. So, powerful as her eventual transformation is, it's hard to imagine how much more so it would have been if all the groundwork had been properly laid.
To stick with the rebels, let's talk someone who's on their side without initially knowing it. Dietrich, the charismatic TV talk show host who seems to toe the Norsefire line, until outed as concealing not only unconventional art and paraphernalia that's become illegal contraband, but his entire identity, as a gay, eccentric, irreverent free spirit who's had to spend most of his life suppressing who he is.
And how do we learn all of this?
You wear a mask for so long you forget who you were beneath it.
That's right. Dietrich tells us.
Via a super quick rundown of his torturous double life, in which the great Stephen Fry does his best to garner our empathy in the paltry time allotted, but with little more affect than hearing a wino's sob story at the pub.
The richness of this character's possibilities was matched only by the neglect lent to it. His rebellious and reckless clowning of Sutler is set up in a rush and almost feels like it comes out of nowhere.
His black bagging is a disturbing development for sure.
Not so funny now, is it? Funny man.
But I'd say the general reaction is more of an, "Aw, that sucks," than the dismayed gasp it should have been. And "Aw, that sucks" just doesn't make for memorable cinema. And drifting to the middle ground brings us to the enigmatic Chief Inspector Eric Finch, the quintessential investigator and questioner character. But there's a lot more to him than that. He's intriguing from the start. Brilliant, contemplative, crafty, and burdened by a certain integrity that belies his position as a high-ranking Norsefire police official, in which his trepidation is palpable.
England prevails.
And he's exceptional among his fellow characters in that he's so archetypal that he doesn't really suffer from the backstory deficiency of the others. With Finch, we get just enough so we can infer the rest. He was likely already a competent detective who got absorbed into the party when they took over. He's single, living alone in a pretty nice townhouse that's probably a perk of the job. Possibly divorced, maybe estranged from some former family. All pretty standard fare. But as well set up and fleshed out as Finch is, how many of you remembered what his name was before you started this video? Yeah, see? There are still some issues here.
What does that mean?
But they belong to a later segment. For now, suffice it to say that Finch's importance isn't reflected in his coverage.
Can you prove any of this?
We'll come to that. Now let's move on up the ranks to this caricature.
Creepy Creedy.
I don't know about you, but I initially thought he was the guy from Phantasm. Anyway, he's evil and ruthless.
Insecure. He blackbags people.
It was his idea for Norsefire to unleash their virus domestically instead of in a hostile nation.
Which, surprise, surprise, we're told.
3 targets are chosen to maximize the effect of the attack: a school, a tube station, and a water treatment plant.
And he enjoys tending the flowers in his greenhouse.
Any questions? As incomplete as the good guys' backdrops are, they feel like old dear friends compared to the antagonists. Creedy is a one-note plank of wood. We know so little about him as a man that he feels like more of just a menacing force than a character. That's not the end of the world story-wise, but I can't help but imagine that seeing him get his in the end,
with my hands around your neck,
could have been orders of magnitude more satisfying than it is.
And finally,
at last,
we come to High Chancellor Adam Sutler. Take a guess at how we learn where he came from.
A young, up-and-coming politician. He's a deeply religious man and a member of the Conservative Party.
Yep, you got it. Essentially, every time we see him, he's on a giant monitor berating his people.
347 days, gentlemen. 347 failures!
As only the great John Hurt could.
We do not have the adequate force.
We are being buried beneath the avalanche of your inadequacies.
We are effectively shown that he likes warm milk and doesn't care to be made fun of. It's fitting and even a bit amusing that he meets his end at the hands of Creedy. As it took very little for V to turn them on each other. More on this later. But as far as how we feel about this horrible person finally being disposed of,
it elicits a big fat meh.
Out of curiosity, I wonder if you even remembered how he died before I just told you.
Disgusting.
And as for the remaining characters...
Well, with the key players so underdeveloped, how do you think the rest of them fared?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Still better than your wafer-thin characters.
Yeah.
You raise a good point. Maybe we don't need them. Yeah? Then you lose the last entertaining part of this mess.
What was it we said about not funny anymore?
Whatever.
Had to get one of those in. So, moving on from the background, or lack thereof, in part 3 we'll explore how V for Vendetta played out within the timeline of its plot.
What went right? What went wrong? What went sideways? And what went off the rails? And can we look forward to more of that virtuosic wordplay?
That's right. And don't forget to like, share, tweet, comment, subscribe, and ring the notification bell.
Maybe I will. Maybe I won't.
We'll see you soon.
This is simply the beginning.
Thanks for watching.
That's quite enough of that, thank you very much.